Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's bonus episode of Planet Critical, a podcast for a world in crisis. This week, I spoke with economic anthropologist Jason Hickel about ecosocialism and degrowth. And everyone, I have good news. We might not all have to be farmers. So for anyone that's been following this podcast for a while, there's a lot of concern about overshoot, if we've passed the point of no return, and whether or not governments are going to install the policies necessary to bring the planet back from ecological demise. And what Jason joined me to discuss are the policies that we can actually implement to not only stop overshoot, but to improve everybody's quality of life. So the focus of degrowth obviously is about reducing or stopping the economy's dependency on growth as kind of the driving policy. That we cannot continue to grow on a finite planet, that's obvious. But that also reducing energy consumption and reducing material consumption actually benefits not only just the planet, but people. Now, we all know we have to reduce energy consumption, right? Because we cannot continue to use fossil fuels in the way that we are, and electricity is never going to be able to provide us with the amount of energy that we currently have access to. But what I particularly enjoyed about this conversation was the focus on reducing material consumption. What does that mean? It doesn't mean just recognizing that minerals and metals are equally finite on this planet, but it also means about reducing individual consumption and, as Jason points out, reducing the elite's consumption, who are they're the ones essentially overshooting all the time, not the working classes around the world, not the 60% of the world living in dire poverty, but those in power who enjoy their lifestyles. Now, Jason has 3 policies that we can implement that would stop ecological overshoot and also dramatically improve the lifestyle of everyone on the planet. Not just us in the West, not just saving us from being farmers, but actually increase the quality of life for the 60% that are currently living in poverty. Those policies are a climate job guarantee with a living wage, i.e., if you want to be part of the economy that focuses on maintaining ecological balance and working within the planetary boundaries, then you are guaranteed of a job, you're guaranteed enough money to live off of, to live well from, to provide for your family. And essentially that is a question of redistributing the resources and the income that currently exist in the economy. Now that's brilliant because it promotes a sense of responsibility as a human being on this planet, as a part of a wider ecological framework and system, and promotes work that is about balancing the ecological system and framework. And it also essentially deals with the universal basic income question, but linking it into climate and ecology, which I think, frankly, is just smarter. The second one is a shorter working week, i.e., we redistribute the requisite labor amongst more people whilst not reducing their access to income, which allows them to spend more time with their families, more time doing what they love, and more time cooking and fixing things, and essentially reducing their overall consumption, which is something we discussed at length on the episode, because I brought up, well, surely people have more time off, they will consume less. And he says, well, no, because they will have more time to actually engage with their environment and to do things like odd jobs and maybe, I don't know, have a vegetable garden and spend time with their family and not be in this frenetic rush to kind of fulfill the void, not to get too philosophical, but also to fulfill the jobs that need doing in their life by using the market that exists, which is essentially the market of consumption. Finally, the big one is universal basic services, i.e. giving everybody access to healthcare, to education, to public transport, i.e. decommodifying that which gives us dignity in this life. And the economic framework that enables that to be fiscally possible is you're essentially just improving the purchasing power of your existing income. Let that sink in for a moment. Improving the purchasing power of the existing income, rather than watch the purchasing power decrease because of inflation and increasing inequality. Now, Jason says when you poll people in rich countries about this way of life, about 70% are on board. They want to work less. They want to have more time with their families. They want other people to have, and themselves to have, access to education and to healthcare. And plenty of people are willing to work in pro-climate industries in order to make that happen. And especially when you think about if we implement that in rich countries and we decrease our energy consumption and we decrease our material consumption, the fact that that could finally lift developing nations out of poverty, which they've been trapped in because of extractive capitalism, it seems like a win-win policy, right? It seems like, like, why aren't we doing it now? Well, of course, capitalism. Capitalism's a huge issue, not just as an ideological framework of incessant growth, but also because of the concentration of power that capitalists have, i.e., the 1% essentially having more voting rights than the rest of us because of their access to decision makers, if not their access to making decisions for the rest of us. Jason says this is going to require a social movement. He didn't use the word grassroots, but I can imagine that's exactly what he means. In order to bend political will to what is necessary for the public, it is going to have to come from the public. There is going to have to be a push which demands an increase in our own education about what is viable, what's possible, and what we should be doing. He says that the environmental movements, the social justice movements, the labor movements, they all have to come together, i.e. the left finally has to come together to recognize their mutual goals and to recognize that they can walk the same path to achieving those goals. I personally would like to see a pan-European Green Party, i.e. You've got the International Green Party that has its universal policies like, say, degrowth and decarbonization, et cetera, and then in each nation you have that individual chapter which then applies specific policies that are relevant to those people. I think it's going to be that kind of movement that springs from young people that will enable the implementation of these degrowth policies, which require multiple things to be implemented at the same time in order not to replicate the system of capitalism that, for example, is driving the green economy bullshit. And what I mean by that is, and we touch on this in the episode quite a bit, whilst renewables, or to pull from Alice Friedman, rebuildables are better than fossil fuels, you cannot discuss renewables or rebuildables without also discussing decreasing energy consumption. Because if not, what you're going to see is the ravaging of the global south for their metals rather than for their fossil fuels and for their forests. And it's very interesting geopolitically right now to watch which nations and which individuals are buying up mines all over the world and parcels of land, because they see the metal and mineral markets are going to explode over the coming decades because of the willingness, or probably just necessity now for public image of governments, to attempt to switch to renewables. And they're essentially buying control of that market, which will guarantee or at least massively prohibit it becoming a market that is grounded in some kind of social good. Of course, the impact that's going to have on local people who are already at the forefront of climate change and the climate crisis in developing nations will be astonishing, terrible, devastating. Jason mentions lithium during our interview. For anybody that doesn't know, lithium is key for batteries. Tesla uses a lot of lithium. And I think there was a report published in The Economist last year that showed the lithium industry uses a huge amount of child labor in developing countries. We're aware of that problem, and yet, shockingly, and rather not shockingly, nothing yet is being done to combat it. So that's why, if you want to talk about switching to rebuildables, you also have to talk about the social justice programs and policies that go along with it to ensure it's not just, as I said, a reiteration of the extraction and inequality engendered by capitalism over the past 500 years. I really liked what Jason had to say because it was hopeful, because it provided a framework for a better future. I always talk about the marketing problem of the climate crisis. And because it can speak to so many people around the world, this vision of a better life for both us, biodiversity, the planet, everything, then it seems like something we can get on board with. So keep an eye out locally for your politicians or for your union leaders or for your activists who are talking about this, because as Jason says, it is going to have to come from the ground. All right, that's enough from me this week. Do make sure to go and listen to the episode. You can listen to it on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual platforms. To my Patreon subscribers and anyone else watching, thank you very much for tuning in. Leave a comment to let me know what you think of these bonus episodes and, of course, of the podcast episodes. And especially if there's somebody that you want me to interview, just put it below. You can also find out more about the project at planetcritical.com. You can subscribe there, or you can subscribe on YouTube. If you're getting a lot out of Planet Critical, please do consider supporting the project on Patreon. All of the links are in the description box below. To everyone who is supporting the podcast, thank you. I'm thrilled. You make this work possible, and I love seeing a Planet Critical community spring up with people from all over the world. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope this was valuable. I'll see you next week.